October 14, 1943. 27,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. You can feel the cold first. It crawls down through the canvas of flight suits, into fingers that never stop working, into faces that have been windburned white by a dozen mornings like this. The nose of the B-17 ahead of you is a dark silhouette against a washed-out sun. The engines are a steady, animal roar. Every man on board has learned to read the tonic of those four right cyclones like another heartbeat. For this crew, pilot at his yoke, co-pilot watching the horizon, bombardier cupping the fragile northern sight, and the radio operator half bent over his set, the sky is both sanctuary and execution chamber. Flak is a language in this airspace. Sudden black puffs that blossom like poisonous flowers below, each one a threat to wing spars, control cables, human flesh. They call this day Black Thursday. 291 flying fortresses climbed from England, forming an escort of iron and resolve that will be tested and torn. The mission is simple in its calculus: strike the ball-bearing plants and factories that keep German engines running. The mission is brutal in its reality. When the bomb bay doors open and the fortresses stand exposed on their bomb runs, the Luftwaffe and the anti-aircraft batteries below have one aim: to shred formations, to break aircraft into scrap and men into silence. On the intercom the voice is tight-clipped: bombs away. Keep it steady. Outside, ground fire rakes a starboard engine. Blue flame licks the nacelle and a stream of hydraulic fluid sprays like a wounded animal. The fortress lists, yet it keeps flying. Inside the fuselage the world is intimate and immediate. The top turret gunner, a private from Ohio, only 21, clamps his gloves on twin .50 caliber Browning barrels and watches tracers stitch the sky. The waist gunners, cramped and exposed, trade Spartan jokes with teeth chattering, then fall silent when the horizon fills with the black silhouettes of FW-190s and BF-109s. The tail gunner hears different things: shrapnel pinging past the rudder, the distinct thunk of rounds packing behind him, the creak of structure. A medic checks a broken jaw. The navigator peers down through small portholes, searching for the jagged tracks of rural roads, the plume of smoke from a ruined factory, the geometry of a city below. All this breathes into a single fact many Luftwaffe engineers once dismissed: that a B-17 could be a flying coffin, that its advantages were illusion. They were wrong. German engineers had, in fact, captured B-17s and flown them for study. They rebuilt and tested them to learn where they were vulnerable and where they were astonishingly tough. Planes that, to casual eyes, should have been shredded by flak and fighters were sometimes limping home on two engines, with control surfaces shredded, fuselages patched by shrapnel, and still bearing the names and slogans painted by crews on the ground. Those captured examples gave the Germans valuable intelligence on B-17 construction. But they did not erase the stubborn reality that the fortress's rugged design and redundant systems often bought crews the time they needed to fight their way back across hostile sky. Up front, the pilot feels it first: a searing vibration in his hands, the subtle tug of asymmetrical thrust. He barks orders: feather the failed engine, transfer power, keep formation. The crew obeys because there is no other life available to them. The fortress answers with a stubbornness that becomes almost a character in its own right. A wing that will hold even with half its skin gone, a fuselage that refuses to fold. Down below, the town of Schweinfurt is a pattern of factories and river, the very things the planner said could choke a war machine. Above it, the Boeing B-17s are symbols of another machine, an industrial nation's ability to build and replace, to send wave after wave until attrition itself becomes the price the enemy cannot bear. There are moments of terrible clarity. A man in the nose, the bombardier, steadies the Norden as if it were a living thing, while the rest of the crew becomes a soundscape of labor. The clack of radio keys, the shuffle of boots on metal, the hiss of oxygen regulators. A second later, a flash. A wingman folds under a hail of flak. A B-17 lurches, its tail a ragged question. Crews who have flown together for months know each other's tells. The half-smile of the engineer when he has a plan, the quiet of a gunner who has seen too much. Across the radio, someone whispers a name from campaigns past: Memphis Belle, and for a split second the plane's legend steadies them. A B-17 that had made it through 25 missions and been paraded home. a proof that the fortress could survive where theory said it might not. The name is talisman and challenge. By the time the flak and fighters have done their worst, the toll will be counted in twisted metal and empty bunks. More than 60 fortresses will fail to return on this day. Many more will stagger home carved by enemy fire. Black Thursday will force a reckoning, not only in the 8th Air Force's tactics, but in how every man within the fortress understands what their machine can and cannot do. For now, at 27,000 feet, amid the smell of oil and burnt insulation and the thin electric tang of fear, the B-17 keeps climbing and falling and fighting, a fortress of aluminum and courage caught between theory and the harsh arithmetic of war. Spring 1942, East Anglia, England. The sky is a flat iron plate, gray and low, as a flight of B-17s rolls off the concrete and climbs into the haze. The bomber crews speak in half-jokes, the kind meant to keep fear at bay, but their glances betray uncertainty. At headquarters, some Luftwaffe engineers had labeled the new American fortress a lumbering beast, too slow, too vulnerable, too optimistic in its claim to dominate daylight bombing. But the men aboard these machines know they're about to test that assumption. At 26,000 feet the formation grinds into the westward breeze. The 4 right cyclones howl. The bomb bays are shut and locked with 4,000 pounds of steel and TNT. In the cockpit the pilot, a major from the 97th Bomb Group, checks his instruments, oil temperature creeping upward, air density thin, the view from the cockpit windows rimmed by ice crystals. At his side the co-pilot grinds his teeth in the cold. The navigator, hunched over his drift meter and chart table, prepares to guide the formation deep into occupied territory. Every man wears his Mae West flotation vest, more symbol than real reassurance at this height. Early missions were marked by skepticism, from within and without. The fortress had been conceived in the 1930s as a long-range bomber with heavy defensive armament, yet the Nazi engineers who inspected captured models believed it would be brittle under flak or broken by the nimble Luftwaffe fighters. Yet what the B-17 began to show was a very different story. On this sortie the formation meets flak near the Belgian coast. Black puffs bloom beneath the wings. A burst slams into the bomb bay, rattling the floor plates and sending rivet springs singing overhead. A waist gunner curses, grips his Browning .50, and watches tracers arch into the clouds. The fortress burns a wingtip fuel tank, but still holds formation. A tail gunner, jaw set, counters an enemy fighter wave that darts in at 6 o'clock low. The machine creaks, shudders, but climbs on. These early encounters exposed flaws, the need for tighter formation, more guns, improved aerial escorts. But the fortress also revealed its virtues. It brought crews home from impossible damage levels. It flew long missions from England into the heart of Germany and back, delivering bombs into factories that had seemed safe. It earned its nickname, the Flying Fortress. The production lines in Seattle, Long Beach, and Burbank churned out over 12,700 of them between 1937 and 1945. As late 1942 turned into 1943, the limitations of unescorted daylight bombing became all too clear. The doctrine of high-altitude formations believing they could defend themselves began to falter against the massed fighters and flak of German airspace. But the fortress crews kept flying, each mission burning away residual skepticism. The bombers' reinforced steel structure, self-sealing fuel tanks, redundant control systems, defensive armament, and 10-man crews became a symbol of endurance. Engineers who once mocked the lone bomber now inspected wrecks of bombers that returned despite shattered turrets, missing gunners, punched-out wing spars. Inside an already battered F model of the fortress, the radio operator leans over his set and patches through a garbled message. Engine 4 out, feathering prop, we'll try for home. Below, German towns turn into glowing embers as the bombs fall. The bombardier gives his mark, the Norden sight locks on. For a Frenchman under German occupation, a thunderbolt-like shape overhead must conjure little hope. For the crew the job is simple: hit the target, survive the return. By mid-1943 the scale of the effort increases. The crew know that flying their aircraft means confronting the gravest lessons of modern war: industrial might, enemy defense, and the willingness to press on. The fortress is no invulnerable angel, but it is becoming the backbone of a strategy. Daylight bombing, industrial attrition, the grinding down of the Reich's war machine. Engineers in Germany may still whisper that the bomber is vulnerable, but as each fortress returns, limping and scarred, the whispers start to quiet. Summer 1943. High above the Ruhr Valley, the sun is a pale coin behind smeared clouds, its light flickering through the contrails of 100 fortresses pushing eastward. The air inside the fuselage is colder than a winter barn at dawn. Every breath comes through rubber and frost-rimmed oxygen masks. Yet sweat stings the eyes of the waist gunners as they move, checking ammunition cans, tapping charging handles, counting the seconds before the enemy arrives. They feel it before they see it, the shift in the sky's rhythm. The formation tightens, engines growling in chorus. Then a clipped warning over the intercom. Bandits inbound. 11 o'clock high. From the left side of the horizon the first wave comes slicing in. FW-190s, their stubby wings flashing in the thin light, racing toward the bombers like shards of black metal. The lead fortress shudders as cannon fire streaks past its nose. A gunner inside the top turret swings his twin .50s and squeezes the triggers. The barrels chatter, brass casings tumble onto the catwalk, the vibration climbing up through his chest. Tracers arc into the sky like burning ropes. A fortress off to starboard takes the first brutal hit, a burst of fire into its wing root. Flames crawl along the aluminum skin. A moment later the bomber rolls, dips, and begins a slow, sickening spiral toward the clouds below. No parachutes appear. No one has the breath to speak of it. In the radio compartment, the operator fights the tremor in his hands as he straps himself down and listens for fragments of transmissions ricocheting across the airwaves. Static. Urgent voices. A scream cut off mid-syllable. Through the narrow corridor behind him, the navigator braces against the bulkhead, charts scattered, pencils rolling on the floor as the fortress jolts under flak. Outside, the Ruhr's factories glow faintly behind a curtain of smoke, the heart of Germany's war industry. Tall chimneys reach upward like iron spears, daring the fortresses to come closer. The flak batteries answer with precision. Bursts pepper the formation, each explosion a black blossom that rocks the bombers in their flight path. Every crewman knows that to release bombs with accuracy they must hold their straight and level course, even as flak walks toward them, step by deliberate step. In the nose, the bombardier lies prone behind the glass blister, hands tight on the grips of the Norden. He steadies himself as the fortress trembles. Steady, steady, he mutters, half to the pilot, half to himself. Below, the target crawls closer. Rows of factories, rail lines, machine shops beating the lifeblood of the Reich. An enemy fighter slashes beneath the nose, so close the bombardier sees the pilot's goggles glint back at him. A shock of instinct forces him to duck even though the plexiglass dome offers no cover. The nose gunner opens up with a roar, the barrels glowing faintly in the thin air. A sudden jolt runs through the fuselage. The right waist gunner is thrown sideways as a flak burst punches a hand-sized hole through the skin of the aircraft. Wind whips through the opening, scattering pieces of insulation like snow. He steadies himself, checks for blood, then returns to his gun. There's no time to dwell, another attack wave is already coming. Yet through it all the fortress holds. Rivets groan, metal flexes, but the frame remains intact. The pilot feels the yoke twitch under strain, but the big bomber responds with stubborn obedience. Even with a wounded engine and a rattling tail assembly, the aircraft keeps its place in formation. Then comes the call. Bombs away. 4,000 pounds drop free, the fortress leaps upward with the sudden release, and the shockwave of falling steel reverberates through the crew like a collective exhale. Below, the Ruhr braces for impact. The formation turns homeward, battered but still breathing. Behind them, columns of smoke begin to rise, thin at first, then thick, merging into a single dark plume that climbs toward the heavens. By late 1943, the Allied strategy had sharpened into its most dangerous form. Daylight precision bombing deep into the industrial heart of Germany, the Ruhr Valley. On a gray morning in November, over the sprawling steel plants and rail yards around Hamm and Dortmund, formations of B-17s droned in lines like iron leviathans. The sky was thick with anticipation. This was no simple bombing run, it was a gamble against memory and machine. In the cockpit of one fortress, Major Walter Wally Henson of the 91st Bomb Group scanned the horizon. His flight lieutenant sat beside him, eyes squinting at cloud layers that teased a poor bomb run. They had been briefed to drop on rail marshalling yards, vital arteries in Germany's industrial bloodstream. Intelligence had flagged heavy flak concentrations here. The Germans knew exactly how precious these lines were. At 26,000 feet, the fortress nose dips slightly as they begin their bomb run. The bombardier, Lieutenant Charles Eaton, peers through his Norden sight, hands steady on the grip, even when everything around him wants to tremble. Outside, anti-aircraft bursts pop and bloom, puffs of black smoke, each one a potential death sentence. The fortress, wing joined to its formation, holds steady, a testament to its design. Rivets groan, but the airframe remains solid. Suddenly, a high flak bursts to the port side. A shell detonates almost under their left wing, and fragments rattle along the fuselage. Eaton murmurs, "Hold, hold, release in 3, 2, 1, the doors open, bombs drop away, disappearing into a wake of heat and exhaust. The fortress surges upward in the relief of lightened weight. Behind them, the smoke rises from the target like a wound. No sooner have the bombs gone than fighters appear. FW-190s peeling in from above, their sleek forms silhouetted against the dull sky. Gunners in the top turret snap into action, .50 calibers chattering as tracers ignite. Below, a waist gunner fires at a fighter diving in from 6 o'clock. The tail gunner pushes back hard, the vibration of every burst reverberating through his shellback seat. In the radio compartment, the operator scrambles to patch distress calls across the formation. Over the intercom comes the voice of the lead pilot, "Keep tight. Don't break formation." But a bomber a few ships over is already wounded. Smoke from its right engine curls like a dark ghost. The top turret gunner shouts, "I've got bandits high. 3 of them." The navigator, Captain Tom Willis, leans on his chart table, glancing past the windows at the sprawling Ruhr below. He sees the rivers, the grid of factories, the ribbons of rail lines, all targets, all vulnerable, all deadly. He swallows and taps his fingers on the chart, working out their escape route. Moments stretch like rubber as flak detonates again, this time closer. A thunderous crack under the belly as shell fragments tear through the bomb bay area, rattling loose gear. The engineer sits frozen at his panel, eyes flicking to warning lights, feeling the hum of damaged systems. 2 engines sputter, 1 fumes. He shouts to the pilot, "Port inboard, backup trouble." But the fortress is unbowed. With systems failing, the crew wrangles the failing engines, cuts fuel to the damaged side, realigns the flight path. The beast groans, sways but keeps flying. Behind them, other fortresses handle their wounds. Some list low, others hold firm, but all fight for altitude and life. Suddenly the intercom crackles. The lead pilot, "All ships, fall in. Regroup for home." The tail of the formation rattles. Survivors struggle to stay close as damaged bombers peel off. The sky seems to shift, not just with threat but with a new kind of purpose. These attacks are not just missions, they are statements. America can strike deep and the fortress will endure. Below, towns like Hamm and Dortmund watch the thunderheads of war pass overhead. Anti-aircraft batteries continue to fire, but every burst is more fragmented, more desperate. The German defenders are learning, but so are the Americans. Each raid costs dearly, but each returns builds a legacy. The cost is high, but the resolve is higher. As the fortresses turn for home, wounded but unbroken, the men on board understand, this aircraft is not just metal and engines. It is a symbol of industrial might, of human tenacity, and a prophecy, that the Reich's factories may produce steel, but the fortress produces endurance. August 17, 1943. Dawn breaks weakly over the English countryside as crews from the 4th Bomb Wing gather around their aircraft. B-17Fs lined across the grass like iron giants waiting for orders. This will be one of the most daring double strikes of the war. Regensburg and Schweinfurt, a 1-2 punch meant to cripple German fighter production. Every man knows the stakes. Every man senses the quiet before the storm. Inside, Sweet Chariot, AB-17 with more patched holes than original paint, the crew moves through pre-flight with a ritual solemnity. The pilot, Captain Frank Delaney, checks the magnetos twice. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Harris, taps the altimeter, making sure the needle doesn't stick this time. In the radio compartment, Tech Sergeant O'Shea tests frequencies, jotting shorthand notes that jitter with his nerves. The waist gunners, Morales and Keaton, compare ammo loads, trading jokes that fall flat in the cold morning air. The engines start one by one, cyclones coughing, spitting, then roaring awake. The ground shakes. The entire base seems to vibrate as hundreds of fortresses lumber onto the runway. When the wheels leave the earth, every man feels the familiar mixture of fear and release. Hours later, approaching Regensburg, the formation meets its first baptism of fire. The sky erupts in flak, dense, black, coordinated. Sweet Chariot shivers as sharp metallic cracks slam into her belly. The navigator, Lieutenant Bishop, braces over his chart table as a shockwave rattles his teeth. A flak fragment slices past his shoulder, embedding into the bulkhead with a metallic scream. Then comes the Luftwaffe. Bf-109s rise like hawks from below, while FW-190s dive from the sun. They coordinate with brutal precision. The top turret gunner, Staff Sergeant Lewis, yells into the intercom. Fighters 12 high, multiple. A 190 tears past, guns blazing. The shockwave knocks Lewis against his harness. Tracers streak along the starboard wing, punching 3 neat holes that whistle in the wind. In the tail, Corporal Jensen fires burst after burst, the vibration numbing his arms. He curses under his breath, half prayer, half rage. Another B-17 ahead takes a direct hit to its wing root. For a moment it hangs, suspended in the cold blue sky, then the wing snaps, shearing away like paper, and the bomber spirals downward trailing smoke and shattered aluminum. No chutes appear. Inside, Sweet Chariot, hydraulic fluid sprays across the radio compartment in a fine mist. O'Shea wipes his goggles, squinting through the chaos of static and screams. He hears one phrase cut through clearly. Regensburg in sight. The bombardier, Lieutenant Avery, crawls forward into the nose. Through the plexiglass blister he sees the sprawling Messerschmitt factory complex, sun glinting off steel and glass. Smoke columns already rise from earlier strikes, but the target is intact enough to hit hard. Pilot, steady, steady. Flak bursts walk toward them, each explosion closer, brighter, hotter. Avery clenches the grip of the Norden. The runway layout aligns. Crosshairs drift, center, and lock. Bombs away. The fortress leaps upward, lighter, shuddering as Avery closes the bay doors. Below, rows of German fighter fuselages and assembly halls vanish under a cloud of dust and flame. But there's no time to admire the strike. The formation swings south, toward North Africa. No return to England for refuel. No familiar routes. And the Luftwaffe is furious, swarming like hornets. The intercom crackles with half-panicked breaths. The engineer monitors fuel with a sinking heart. The starboard inboard engine is losing pressure. The portside turbocharger runs hot, too hot. The pilot feels the yoke stiffen as the fortress fights to maintain altitude. Behind them, Regensburg burns. Ahead of them, hours of open sky await, enemy territory beneath, uncertain rescue ahead. And through it all, Sweet Chariot flies on, wounded but unbroken. The Mediterranean sun is still hours away when Sweet Chariot limps southward, her 4 engines coughing in uneven rhythm. The Regensburg attack is behind them. Now the crew faces the most dangerous part of the mission, the long, exposed flight to North Africa. No escorts. No friendly airfields. Only the endless blue void stretching beneath their wings. Inside the cockpit, Captain Delaney fights the yoke with white-knuckled effort. Engine 3's manifold pressure dances just below the danger line. Engine 2 smokes intermittently, coughing every few minutes like an old man refusing to lie down. The co-pilot, Harris, wipes frost from his mask and checks the gauges again. Fuel consumption rising faster than predicted. "3's gonna die on us," he mutters. Delaney doesn't deny it. We'll nurse it. Keep us level. Behind them, the flight engineer, Sergeant McAllister, crouches over the engine panel, sweat freezing against his temples. He adjusts mixture controls with tiny feathering movements. 1 millimeter too far and the engine will flame out for good. His fingertips are numb, but he works with the precision of a surgeon. In the bomb bay, freezing air knifes through every seam. The bay is empty now, but the crew still avoids looking directly at the dark void below. Morales, the left waist gunner, presses his gloved hands against the vibrating fuselage, feeling the aircraft's heartbeat falter and rally. "How are we looking?" he calls back to Keaton. "Like a cow with 3 legs, Keaton replies, grinning behind his mask, but his eyes betray worry. Up in the nose, Bombardier Avery takes over the navigator's table as Bishop studies the map. German coastline falls away behind them. The Mediterranean gleams faintly, a polished plate under the rising sun. But the silence over the intercom is heavy, slackened only by the distant thrum of crippled engines. Then it hits. A sudden shudder ripples down the fuselage. Engine 3 sputters once, twice. Then the propeller seizes and stops, frozen in place like a blade of silver scrap. The aircraft yaws left violently as Delaney wrestles it back. "Engine 3 out," Mac calls. "Feathering now." The drag lessens, the fortress stabilizes. But there's a new problem. The fuel calculations were based on 4 engines and they're still hours from the African coast. Sweet Chariot is losing altitude. Slowly but steadily. A jolt. A sharp metallic crack. Morales freezes. A hairline fracture snakes across the starboard waist window. One more blast of turbulence and it'll erupt inward. He braces a panel against it, praying the thin sheet of aluminum will hold. Time stretches thin. Below them lies the blue emptiness of sea. No ships. No islands. Just water. When the sun finally rises, the glow silhouettes a ragged formation of B-17s ahead, others from the Regensburg wave equally battered. A few trail smoke. One barely holds its outer wing, the tip fluttering like a wounded bird. "Looks like we're not the only ones," Harris mutters. Hours pass. The fuel needles creep downward. The fortress trembles as if exhausted. Then, like a mirage, an outline appears on the southern horizon. A faint smear of tan against blue. "Land!" Bishop shouts, his voice cracking. The crew surges to the windows, helpless smiles spreading beneath oxygen masks. Keaton whoops aloud. Morales presses his forehead against cold metal, relief washing through him like warm water. Delaney keeps them steady as the coast of Algeria swells into focus. Beige sands, thin roads, the distant glint of glass from an Allied airfield. But the struggle isn't over. As they descend, Engine 2 finally gives up. Smoke turns to flame, brief, hungry, licking along the cowling. Max shouts over the intercom. "Shut it down. Kill it. Kill it." The flames gutter out. They drop fast, too fast. Delaney grips the yoke, jaw set. "Hold on," he growls. "We're bringing her in." The runway rises to meet them, silhouetted against the blazing African day. Sweet Chariot, battered and broken, braces for her final test. The fortress's wheels hit the tarmac with a gut-wrenching jolt, the entire airframe trembling like a wounded beast. Inside, Sweet Chariot is a mess. Rivets have popped, panels are dented, hydraulic lines hiss, and the once orderly compartments are strewn with broken oxygen masks, snapped wiring, and dropped tools. The crew sits in stunned silence for a beat. Then the engineer, Sergeant McAllister, exhales hard and begins his walk-around. He clicks flashlights over the wings, inspecting the wounds. Shrapnel holes in fuel tanks, scorched patches of skin, the exposed framework of ribs that once flexed under pressure. Every puncture tells a story, of flak, of fighters, of a fight to come home. McAllister's gloved hands press patiently, it seems, checking for structural stress, testing whether this bird still breathes. At the nose, Lieutenant Avery emerges from the bombardier's compartment, his face streaked with soot and sweat. He leans on the plexiglass blister, looking out at the airfield, the low-slung hangars, the gravel taxiways, the rows of other damaged fortresses limping in or already being worked on. He touches the glass almost reverently, as if feeling how little remains between him and the sky that tried to kill him. Meanwhile, the radio operator, Sergeant O'Shea, sits by the rear exit, running a finger over the console where acoustic shock punched through. His radio set still works, but several connectors are cracked. He mutters to himself, checking reports. Engine 2 overheating, number 3 feathered, tail control semi-responsive. The cracks in the fortress are not just skin deep. They run through its wires, its hydraulics, its nerves. In the hangar, mechanics swarm over the plane. This is no gentle servicing. It's war surgery. One crew replaces a wing section, another patches torn paneling. They swap out propellers, change engines, reroute fuel lines. Photographer engineers document everything. She came home on 2. Nearly burned the turbines out. This is the story of the fortress's robustness, its resilience, its near miracle. Outside, on the apron, the tail gunner, Corporal Jensen, stands on a ladder, his eyes still distant. The tail section above him is peppered with holes. One stabilizer riveted back together, misaligned just enough to groan on control input. He runs his hand down the skin, feeling the memory of each burst, every piece of shrapnel that hammered into metal and didn't tear it apart. The pilot, Captain Delaney, and his co-pilot, Lieutenant Harris, meet with ground crew. They talk in clipped tones about repairs, about next missions, about who's flying again. There are no high fives. Just firm handshakes and tenseness, the unspoken knowledge that they beat back death, but only this time. Night falls. Under the hangar lights, the mechanics continue their work. Sparks fly, engines are reassembled, and structural plates are welded or riveted. The fortress is slowly stitched back together. The pounding echo of metal on metal seems to echo the heartbeat of the men who crew her. For many engineers in Germany who once derided the B-17 as over-engineered and fragile, the irony is unmistakable. These bombers don't just fly, they survive. They return. Battle damage is catalogued, studied, and photographed, and each comeback is another blow to the myth that the fortress was just a lumbering target. Instead, its endurance becomes its legend. In the dim light of the hangar, the crew gathers. Delaney runs his fingers along the yoke. Not perfect, he says softly, but she's ours. Jensen climbs down from the tail, still silent, and places one firm hand on the fuselage. McAllister, flashlight now off, stands near the wing. They don't need words. The fortress has carried them home, and now, in the quiet of the base, they rebuild her, not just for the next mission, but for the future. In these moments, the B-17 is more than a bomber. It's a testament to industry, to courage, to resilience. It is a symbol not just of destruction, but of survival. Spring 1943. Deep in a Luftwaffe evaluation field at Rechlin, test pilot Hans Werner Lurk climbs into a captured B-17, the infamous Wolf Hound, serial 41 to 24585. Originally of the U.S. 303rd Bomb Group, it was forced to belly land in a French hayfield on December 12, 1942. The Germans repaired her, painted their markings on, and brought her to Rechlin for close inspection. Lurk fires up her 4 Wright Cyclones. Through the narrow cockpit windows he watches German engineers studying the airframe, scribbling notes, measuring control surfaces, and testing the guns. He taxis out, expecting a cumbersome beast. Instead, he is struck by how easy to fly and land she is despite her weight. In his own words, once you acclimate to her size and her instruments, she's not unlike one of the Luftwaffe's own He-111s in terms of handling effort. But it's not just maneuverability that surprises them. High-ranking Luftwaffe leaders, including Colonel Adolf Galland, are blunt in their assessment. It unites every possible advantage in one bomber: heavy armor, enormous altitude, colossal defensive armament, and great speed. The Germans note that the B-17 carries 11 well-placed machine gun positions, each able to pack incendiary rounds, a capability few Axis pilots have truly encountered before. Through repeated test flights, they probe every system: cockpit controls, hydraulic lines, fuel tanks, redundant flight surfaces. They simulate attack runs. They fire their own fighters alongside mock dogfights, where the fortress is both target and respected adversary. Engineers come away with grudging admiration. This is not a fragile, slow target. This is a purpose-built fortress of steel and redundancy. At Rechlin, they also study her armor and self-sealing tanks, and they note how much battle damage she can absorb. They realize that many of the fortresses they believed would be shredded by flak or fighter fire actually return home, not by luck but because of design. Later, the Wolfhound is assigned to Camp Geschwader 200, a covert Luftwaffe unit. There, she's repainted with code A3+AE and equipped for special missions, clandestine flights, long-range transport operations, occasionally even agent drops. The Germans also adapt some of their own tech to her. They install a barometric altimeter and a radio altimeter, FUG 101, to make her more useful in night or covert operations. It's a bitter irony. The bomber they once mocked becomes a test bed, a tool, and a teacher. German pilots fly her, practice intercepts, and gradually come to fear what she represents. Not just a powerful bomber, but a symbol of American industrial resilience. Back on the Allied side, every fortress that returns to base, scarred, dented, sometimes missing parts, strengthens that symbol. Each battered machine becomes proof that the Americans can not only strike deep, but survive doing so. Each mission is a referendum on the strength of their manufacturing, their training, and their resolve. By late 1944, the B-17 is no longer just a bomber. It's a psychological weapon. German cities like Dresden, Berlin, and the Ruhr, once considered safe because of their distance, now feel the weight of fortress formations. The day raids, the payloads, and the endurance send a message. The flying fortress is not a fleeting threat. It is a constant, grinding force. In hindsight, the Luftwaffe's early dismissals stand as a tragic miscalculation. They assumed the B-17 would break under pressure. Instead, American crews and engineers built something that endured, and Germans, forced to fly one themselves, saw firsthand why. The fortress had mocked them in their underestimation. Then it flattened their cities.